name's Sean Stingle. I'm the kind of unofficial social media ministry lead here at Living Grace Baptist Church. And we wanted to kind of look at what churches are doing in this time of social distancing with COVID-19. And for the first kind of meeting and trial here, I've got my friend from college, Willis Deitz, kids director at Pleasant Valley. If you want to kind of let us know what you're doing over there, just in general for ministry.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm Willis. I have been the kids director at Pleasant Valley now for almost 2 years, be 2 years in August. And so I oversee the children's ministry from birth all the way to 5th grade and coordinate services. We have 2 really amazing team members, one for our early childhood and one for our elementary education side. And so they're specialized in those areas, and then I oversee the different things that we're doing there. A lot of what my role is geared towards is developing just what we're doing as a ministry as a whole, looking at the calendar and things like that, managing our staff. But then also a lot of my work is devoted towards helping parents parent well. And so connecting them with resources, doing our larger events, coordinating our vacation Bible school, things like that. So through kind of the boots on the ground, I'm going to be the one that's like the 10,000 foot view of ministry. And so, but yeah, so that's Pleasant Valley Kids Ministry in a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
Our team does. So.
Okay. So just looking at your church as a whole, when did they start kind of going online with ministry, whether posting videos, doing church services, streaming, things like that?
Yeah, I think our live streaming service has been around for several years. We're a relatively young church. We're only 12 years old. And so live streaming was something that I think they've been doing for well over 4 years, maybe even 5. But it kind of came from this desire to kind of get content to our folks that are at home who, are considered shut-ins, or widows, folks who wouldn't be able to come to church, but they would still have access. Just as technology has changed and the equipment that people are using at home, we obviously weren't doing CDs or tape cassettes as much, and so the online service is exactly what we would be doing if you were at the church in person. It's just a live stream of that, and so we've been doing that now for several years, and the goal is never for that to replace being with the church, but there are instances where some people just can't. They don't have that kind of access, whether they're in a nursing home or maybe they're abroad, studying abroad, missionary folks that we're connected with who are just not in the States. And so it's really been born out of just a desire to make sure that folks who need the content or want the content have it available to them.
Yeah, I think like that's how we started here as well, as kind of, for shut-in ministries. So I can see that, how that's a big part of the streaming online and how it kind of first got started with a lot of churches. And I don't think any of us expected to need it this much as a church, but obviously that's why we're doing this, is to see, God had this planned. There couldn't have been a better time for this to come. Unless later, we could have had hologram church, but
virtual reality church. I think there's a church startup that is doing virtual church.
Yeah.
So I know that it was at one point a joke that a comedian was using, but now is, I think, something of reality. And I think there's some things. So like there are certainly things that we want to be cautious about. This is not a replacement to community. Community is ultimately the substance of how we know that we love one another, right? So we're not suggesting that live streaming is taking away something that is inherent to the church body. And so how does the body come together? They do so by coming together. And so the goal is like, it's not a replacement for companionship in the church, or camaraderie in the church, or community in the church. It's merely an enhancement to that, and is used in the necessary situations. I think one of the things that we've been doing live streaming for quite a while. One of the things that the pandemic has brought on is kind of pressing us to think in ways that we should have been thinking all along. So like because the value of the live stream is really just kind of a last resort. It's not been the most excellent done thing that we do, right? And so the pandemic's come along, and it's like, oh well, if we're going to do this, and we're doing this as a service to the body, then it should be done excellently to worship God in that manner, to honor Him the way that He ought to be done. And so the pandemic is like, it's something that we've been doing, but now we're going to do it more excellently. Same with like the way that we're being the church. One of the things our pastor is leaning into right now is like, we're not going to go to church, we're going to be the church. And so on Sunday afternoons, the churches, we're doing food drives, and we have 10 items that we want people to bring. They bring those items, they drop them off on tables, and then a team of people sanitize those things, take them in, and then we disperse them to a community that's near our church, to make sure that they have the things that they need during this kind of unique and uncertain time. And so it's interesting. We live in a society that is more connected than it's ever been, and yet we're as disjointed as we've ever been as a nation. And then you throw on top of that isolation. And I think people are beginning to realize, oh my goodness, isolation is way different than, what I think, we should be doing. And so I think there's going to be a renewed sense. Once we come back, I think there'll be a renewed sense of need for community. I think we've taken community for granted. But I also think too, like this is kind of put a pulse on, or given us a pulse on the kind of needs that we have when we don't have access to the church. And so, again, the pandemic has just given us the ability to step back and say, hey, here are some ways that we can be reaching our community that is unchurched. And so the church are now using online services because they have to, but it's also given us a platform to reach out to those who would not necessarily find themselves in a church service. And so that's another reason why we want to make sure that we're doing things excellently, that the people who happen upon our live streams or our content, they see that we care about what we're talking about so much that it's done well. And in so doing that, it would encourage them hopefully to see why we care so much about the story that we're telling, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. How do you feel that, having these online streams have helped like your family or yourself or even the church family in this time?
Yeah, so we're doing a couple of things. So we go live, whether for prayer or for Q&As or just information, like just giving information out to folks. And then we also have obviously the live stream service. So one of the things I think that has been interesting, like just for like parents in general, is like we have every Friday, my wife and I and our two daughters, we go live with family worship. And, we talk a lot about family worship, but we never really talk like in the church. It's like, well, we're not at home, so we're just going to talk abstractly about what family worship is and what it looks like. And here's a book by Donald Whitney, and you can do all of these things at home. But I think one of the cool things is we were like, well, why don't we live stream family worship and show people what we do in our household? And I think that's been interesting for folks to see because, I think they look at us as pastors or as ministry leaders, and they say to themselves, well, of course they have it all together. Of course they do family worship. But if you go and you watch the first episode of Family Worship, like, my girls were fighting at the very end. We were struggling to get through. It's like, this is real life. And so I think the opportunity for us to have our lives on display in accessible formats help people recognize that we're not people to be put on a pedestal. We're just like normal people who have an extraordinary God that lives among us. And so that's like one kind of aspect to what we're doing that I think has helped our families and our people. Of course, I think too is like, when was the last, like, if you have a family of 3 or 4, a lot of times when you're in the gathering, you have kids in kids ministry, and youth are in the youth ministry, and then you have mom and dad in the large gathering, and it's all disjointed. But I think one of the things that live streaming has done within the pandemic has brought the family unit back together, right? And so parents are singing songs and listening to the sermon together with their kids. Their kids are watching mom and dad sing out loud in their living room. So I think the other beautiful thing that is maybe a byproduct of all of this is that for the first time, many families are singing songs of worship to God, to Jesus, in their own homes on a weekly basis. And I think that's probably a really unique and special thing that I hope that we don't lose when the pandemic is over and we go back to having large group settings and doing community groups again, but that our families would learn, oh, we can do this anytime. It doesn't have to just be on Sundays. We can go and we can have our Sunday morning worship, but we can also worship any other day of the week that ends in Y and do so as a family.
Yeah. I kind of like that idea of kind of showing the live family worship. That sounds really interesting. I never thought about like filming just a family worship at home before. But like, I understand where you're coming from. We've got, children's church, we've got youth programs, everything becomes like geared towards a certain community. And we have one Sunday a month where it's family Sunday, or actually it may not even be a month. It may be every other month sometimes, but we sometimes only have that one time for Family Sunday. And this kind of has made every Sunday Family Sunday as we gather around the video. And some people may not even be able to do it on Sunday, and they watch it later in the week, which I think is a great benefit of the streaming as well, as people can, I wasn't able to make it Sunday, I had other obligations. Well, there's still times to do it, and there's watch parties if you need to have other people there with you, even electronically. So
and I think that's right on. And you bring up like in the industries, when you're talking about people who are working third shifts or swing shifts or things like that, like oftentimes they're having to choose between sleep and service, and so in one sense, we're actually serving a subset of the population that we hadn't been serving before, because we're now all of a sudden pushing tons of content out, and I think the thing to keep in mind is like, once the pandemic is over, what are we going to be doing afterwards, right? And so like within Valley Kids and Pleasant Valley as a whole, one of the questions we've been asking ourselves is, should we start something with the intent of stopping, or should we start something and know that this might be something we need to continue until the end of time, and so, or until our context suggests that we need to do something different. So all of that, I think, is something that every context needs to be asking the question on their own. Is like, is this something that I'm only doing for the pandemic, or is this something that could serve my people a lot for the rest of eternity? And I think that's another good question to ask yourself.
Oh yeah, I definitely think we need to focus on, like, this is a ministry, and for some churches it's a brand new ministry that they just started once the social distancing began. I mean, they never thought about it before, and there are so many groups and software and things that allow these churches to try it out for the first time. And it's a ministry that needs to be looked at seriously. And I think going forward, it'll help kind of a lot of people see who they reached and who they were able to speak with during this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think too, like, I had a really interesting exchange this morning because of the additional content that we've been putting out. Somebody from Haiti just happened upon our page, and so now I'm having conversations with a guy in Haiti, and I think, like, as you're sharing content, and it's getting reposted and reshared and liked by a large group of people, that content that goes out to other people. So, one of the things that we talk about too is like, hey, here's your opportunity. What does it look like to love your neighbor during the pandemic? It's staying in isolation and not giving your neighbor coronavirus, but it's also sharing content with other folks. And so one of the fastest ways to get your content out is having your people like it and then share it and have them reshare it. And hopefully that gives you an audience that you would not typically have. And so that's just another byproduct of the scenario that we find ourselves in.
Okay. And what do you do specifically in the kids ministry as the director that maybe another director or a children's minister who hasn't been able to do anything or hasn't been able to get ideas? What have you all done in this time that they might be able to do?
Yeah, so right now, one of the things that we try to bear in mind is that our students are still in school. They just happen to be doing it at home, and they're getting tons of content and tons of information and tons of communication from their teachers and their school. And so we wanted to be really judicious with what we're actually providing to our students. And so we're posting twice a week. This week it's a little different since it's Easter week. We're doing an additional posting for story time, but we typically on Mondays we do a crafting corner, which is geared specifically to our students, and then story time, which is also geared towards our students. And then the church as a whole does family worship. And so my wife and I do family worship on Fridays. And so essentially Valley Kids is posting 3 times a week. We're about to start a new series, myself working through a few things just for parents. And so these are going to be 10 to 15 minute conversations where, like, this week we're going to be talking about fear. Is it a sin to be afraid? And what do we do with our child's fear amidst this pandemic season? And so we're going to be talking about what that looks like and what that means, and how God is using our fear to help us identify our neediness of Him, and how He wants to care for us and love us, and how really this is an opportunity to shower our kids with the expression of God's love for them. So we'll be doing that. We're also going to be doing stuff on sadness. I don't know, like my 4-year-old, I don't know about other people, my 4-year-old is like super sad. She cannot hang out with her neighbor friends anymore. We had a moment last Friday where she saw our friends outside playing, but she couldn't go with them. And she was like, but Daddy, I'm not upset. I didn't do anything wrong. Why can't I be with my friends? And it's like, well, it had nothing to do with what you've done. It's just this virus that we can't go and see our friends. And so just kind of bearing with our kids, how to walk with them in that, and kind of share even in their own sorrows. Hopefully, God willing, we won't see the same kind of consequences that like Italy or China has seen with death tolls. But in preparation for that, we're also doing like a webinar on childhood loss and grief. And so we have a hospice counselor who is an elder of our church, and he and I are going to do a webinar just on grief and loss, and how to talk to your children about loss. The hope is that they don't lose a family member or a grandparent or something like that. But in the case that they do, what do we do with that? Do children experience grief and loss? Of course they do. And so how do we approach them in that? How do we love them in that? And so that's going to be one of the things we do as well. A lot of it is we're trying to do things that we should have been doing all along, right? And so we're not looking at this as an opportunity to add something new, but to be doing something that we should have been doing from the very beginning. And so, again, we're trying to be really judicious with the content that we put out. It's not going to be totally different than what we would have been doing if they were on site. But it's also probably things that we're going to continue to do even once we're done with this season.
All right. So I think that's all the questions I have, and I think this gave a lot of information out for what we're looking to try and do and kind of get that information out there.
Awesome.
Do you have anything else to add, or?
Yeah, no, I'm super excited about what God is doing. I think one of the things that I've been kind of reminding myself and then reminding folks around me too is that Jesus oftentimes would find ways to isolate himself and go to a desolate place to be alone with the Lord. And so let's just not lose sight of what God could be doing, and let's not waste our isolation, but maybe find a reason to spend more time with him, listen for what he's trying to tell us, and dive into a deeper, more intimate relationship with the Father that we've always had, right? So again, not doing something new, but doing something we should have always been doing. And so hopefully that's an encouragement.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Willis, for coming on and kind of giving me the start to this video and being my test subject as well.
Yeah.
And I'll definitely try and get some links to your church as well in the description, and whatever you think is appropriate here for passing on that information.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.